Hey, Don, it's great to be with you, and you're helping me realize my longstanding motto, which I began at the Pew Research Center when I was running internet and digital technology studies there. We'd had a lot of engagement with the library community, which was delightful and in the early days quite unexpected. And I came to love this world. And so I always made sure my staff knew that I thought that any day spent with a librarian is a better day. So you've made my day better altogether. I started out as a journalist. No, I was not a tech person too terribly much. Other things interested me. And I was in the print news business. I was a daily news reporter and then a weekly magazine, U.S. News and World Report. I became managing editor there after moving up the Stations of the Cross to covering politics and editing sections of the magazine. And I just don't know. The universe tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Print journalism is living the end of days here." And so I thought I should try my hand at another thing, and that's when I had this wonderful opportunity from the Pew Charitable Trusts to create a research unit in the late 1990s and early 2000s, studying the internet and its impact on society, politics, and things like that. And I was gonna retire um, from Pew, but I couldn't make the switch. I announced my retirement, and when the world learned about it, I got a couple of really nice offers about maybe doing future work, and I thought, well, I can slow down a little bit if I don't have anybody reporting to me, and I don't have anybody to report to really. And the University Elon, which is a place that maybe some of your members know that I did long-standing work about the future of the internet with Elon because my daughter went there, and I formed deep relationship with some faculty members there. So for 24 years, we put out reports about the future of the internet. And they invited me to come to campus and continue on with that work. So that's what I've done. That's why I'm affiliated with a place called the Imagining the Digital Future Center at Elon. It's a very similar Pew work, and we're doing these future studies the way that we have done them over the years. And I realized when I got on campus and was introducing myself around to people who didn't know me that I would have missed. I would have been crazy to be watching this AI stuff happening without having a ringside seat to it, without being able to study it and find ways to be observant. And so I'm really glad I'm doing this now. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the data we've been gathering and some of the stuff that I've observed from other wonderful organizations, including Pew, about what's going on with AI, and then maybe talk a little bit about how libraries might fit into the whole story. As you've been rolling out this stuff for a while now, and it sounds like a number of your recent speakers have been thinking hard about this, and the Rockefeller Brothers initiative is very central to the kind of things I know you've been up to for a long time. So I think it's important to point out at the outset that everybody's an AI user, even if they don't know it. This is a wonderful Gallup survey that asked people about just 6 common AI inflected, AI impacted, AI infused applications. And they basically said if you use one of these, you're an AI user. And it turns out that about 2/3 of the adults who use AI don't know they're using it. It's so embedded in the systems we've got. And of course, the big story of recent years has been the language models, but we any of us, especially people who might have had a book recommender system or a music recommender system or a voice assistant or a navigation system, they were already deep into the AI world even without knowing it. It was very parallel to the process that I saw over the years at the Internet Project, where in the early days at Pew, we could ask people, "Are you an internet user?" And they'd know. They'd know if they paid for an ISP, and they know if they clicked and swiped and did things like that. Well, soon enough, AI became the internet became like electricity in their lives. It's just something they did. It was on their phone, and their laptop became another body part anyway. So it's a lot of people didn't know they were internet users, even though they were quite active internet users. The same thing is playing out in the AI world. course, the big bang moment for the way we're talking about AI now was November 30th, 2022. So just 3 years ago, when ChatGPT went on the market and was unveiled to the world. And it became the fastest adopted consumer electronic technology. Forget just digital technology, consumer technology, faster than the phone, faster than electricity, even faster than personal computers, faster than television, faster than radio. That we've never seen growth at the pace that we've seen with the growth of language models. And part of the reason, of course, is because, as you said, these models are being baked into the stuff that we already use. It's in your email system if you click the right button or don't, log off of the button. It's in your word processing systems. It's in your PowerPoints if you feel like using it there. It's in the voice recognition that you're using on your phone and things like that. So people are almost inadvertently becoming adoptees of language models. Again, even if they're not necessarily sure that we call them language models, or in this case, as we talked about them in surveys, generative AI systems. So right now, our data show that 57% of American adults use a language model like ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or Claude. And in the past 6 months, that's grown about 10 points. So the growth curve is still trending up. If you have lived the life that I lived studying digital technology and all kinds of technology adoption, you know that there's going to be a pattern to it. It's just speeded up in the case of AI, but divides are inevitable. And librarians forever have been concerned about digital divides. This is a new one, and this is a new set of literacies that are important for the population to learn, and it's an important set of literacies that they're going to turn to librarians to help them master. And so in a way, your job description as librarians in the coming years is going to be sort of literacy ninjas, just like you were at the dawn of the internet and just like you were at the dawn of the printing press. The dynamic of adoption is because these tools are pretty useful. They're useful in business. They're fun to play with. They are interesting just in and of themselves for answering questions and things. But the propellants of adoption seem to be there, even as the population, in a variety of ways that we measured it at Pew, in a variety of ways I'm measuring at Elon, basically every poll is finding that adoption is high, concern is high. And you wonder when those lines are going to collide, and when people and their concerns, their wariness, their suspicions about the future, their big concern about the labor markets and jobs for their family and their grandchildren and everything like that. So there are ways in which there's a paradox at the heart of this story here, which is people are using this stuff at the same time they're quite worried about the long-term impacts on society. This is Pew data that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And it asked the AI use questions differently. We asked specifically about language models, and we gave people prompts saying ChatGPT and Claude and things like that. So we said, use stuff like that. Here, Pew did something different, which is to ask about AI generally, but then they measured the sort of most important metric. What for them was using AI systems at least several times a week. And close to 2/3 of the population now feels like they're in that kind of engagement. These are demographic data that show a bunch of the patterns that we've also picked up in my work at Elon. Young people in particular, earlier adopters, more rapid adopters, more enthusiastic adopters than older adopters. But still, it's consequential that in this Pew sample, half of adults interact with AI once a week. And in the sample we used of LLM models, we got about 2/3 of Americans 65 and older using language models. So it's a very broadly spreading technology. We didn't pick up the same kind of differences by education levels. Usually, better educated people are much more enthusiastic adopters than not. Right now, both by income and by education, there's a pretty evening of the process in the adoption of language models themselves. And there doesn't, there's a little bit of a partisan difference down there at the lower right, but it's not that consequential. I mean, the bigger story in these data and in the Elon data are it's big, It's growing. It's becoming embedded in people's lives. In our Elon sample, we went after a variety of ways that people were using language models, and we asked these broad questions about informal learning, amusing yourself, getting news and political information. The thing that I would want to point out right here is that the first three things on this list are not related to work. So much of the coverage of AI has been about the work applications and what's going on in workplaces and, of course, the labor market implications. But work is sort of sitting in the middle of the pack of use cases. People are just having fun with this stuff. They're slaking their curiosity. They are, toying around with it, as well as doing things that are add to their productivity. And they're also building it into their sort of civic life. You see there at the bottom, a third of language model users have already got news and political information, a lot of creativity going on. And so there's this sort of, it's a broad use technology. And these are many of the patterns that we saw in the early days of the internet as people began to build it into their lives. They began to build it into more segments of their lives and activities in their lives. Here's an even more lengthy list of options that we ask people about how they use the technology. And again, I would point out right at the top there, 2/3 of language model users use it for searching quick facts. The librarians are acutely aware, just like a lot of other folks are, that that the AI systems and the ways they're being built, for instance, into Google, that AI systems are now sort of default settings for giving people answers to the questions they ask search engines and the ways in which they're using language models themselves to ask questions. So the whole basic, both social and political and certainly economic model of the web is being hammered by these trends where traffic is not nearly at the level in many websites that it used to be, in part because people are getting answers as they key in their questions to the top of a search box and get an answer back from an AI system rather than getting a bunch of links to give them the information from a variety of sources about what they're looking for. Huge change in search behavior and the ways in which people are accessing information, which is a central thing for librarians. You can scan down this list to see other things they're doing. I highlighted those two at the bottom because they were so typical of what we also saw when people first logged on to the internet and figured out what was going on. Some of the early adopters would, you remember, Google their own name and Google the name of their friends and enemies and rivals and old flames and stuff like that. And that's going on with AIs as well. And it might be the first time that lots of people are encountering AI hallucinations. If you Google your own, or if you put your name into a language model, it'll tell you all sorts of stuff that you've done that, of course, you never have done. It won't, and it won't tell you how likely it is that you've done it. It will cert very confidently, like it did for me. I had 2 PhDs at schools that I have never physically been to at all in my life. I don't have a PhD to begin with. And so, there's lots of things going on there. These are recent data from a poll by Associated Press and National Opinion Research Center. Again, it's very similar to ours, but it's important to highlight that the difference between younger users and older users is pretty stark. And the older users are coming up, but it's not necessarily the case that they are using these systems at the same level that their kids and grandkids are using them. This was a big, stunning number that came out about a month ago, I guess, from Common Sense Media, really good research firm that looks, a nonprofit really, that looks at the media habits of teenagers. 72% of teenagers have used AI companions. Those are the companions that they act like their friends, and they ask questions like their friends, and they have budding relationships with, or even more than budding relationships with these systems. And half of them are regular users of the companion systems, or just treating the language model that they have as companions. Enormously important question heading into the future about the social growth and development or stuntedness of teenagers, and the degree to which we are going to be outsourcing essential human relations, social relations to these systems. So it's something we're watching really intently at Elon. then one other piece of data that we did from a survey where we were probing what language models users do, about half of language models said that their AI system is at least a little smarter than they are. So again, this is early days of AI systems. They're not yet even 2.5 years old at the time we did this survey, but there's already a sense that we are encountering an intelligence that in many cases knows more than we know, has a level of intelligence that's greater than ours, at least in some dimensions. And so just a stupendously large question for us as social researchers and for the world is how are we going to cope with that? What is going to be the human meaning of the relationships we have with these things, the way we rely on them, and things like that. Um, sorry. Um, so Don, just when you reached out to me, it was so fun that I've just given a speech at the Internet Librarian Conference like 10 days ago, where I walked through some of the implications of the things I'm talking about, and I began to think about how libraries can be thinking about their position in this new information ecosystem. And I think the first order question, which I'm sure tons of libraries are already wrestling with, is is the one that lots of people are wrestling with, which is what is AI good for? And what can it help me with? What are the sort of rote, routine, boring, uninteresting things that I've got to go through in my life that I can outsource to AI, and therefore freeing up time for me to do other things, probably be more productive, less bored, so more engaged with the wider world. So sorting out what AI is good at and what humans can be free to do is one of the first order questions that lots of institutions, including libraries, are wrestling with. And so, figuring out how you're going to handle basic patron reference questions and circulation issues and marketing and cataloging materials. There are lots of things that you can be thinking of pretty creatively about what you can hand off to AI with pretty modest supervision and maybe free up librarians' time for other more critical human-to-human relationships and human intelligence applications that computers still aren't quite good at. So, and I came up with a variety of ways. This was just sort of a thought experiment for me, but I thought libraries could double down on many of the things they already do, but with a new sensibility thanks to AI systems. So I suggested libraries can be centers for AI literacy and digital empowerment. Just the way that you helped introduce people to the internet, to ebooks, to social media. Librarians were enormously important for lots of communities, just getting their footing on social media. That stuff is very much now in play again. So some of the lessons you learned during that period are going to be pretty applicable to this area. I also suggested that libraries could be transformed into human AI collaboration spaces. The big thing that is now front and center in the culture is how we're going to work with these tools and how we're going to work with them in the future as their intelligence grows, as their capacities get better, as the models themselves get stronger and stronger and bigger. There are ways in which sort of co-evolution, co-intelligence, the partnership between AI and human beings can be enhanced, where both are doing things that are important, both are applying intelligences, humans and machines are applying intelligences that they're good at. And there are ways in which I think librarians might think of themselves as centers of learning for this new AI human collaboration kind of spaces. Of course, libraries have always been good, and you're going to have to be even better now at preserving human memory and cultural context. I think there are lots, if you think about, if you get new time, thanks to the application of AI in some of your systems, thinking about the ways in which you can be, I call them experience orchestrators, community ethnographers, digital preservation analysts, as well as curators, and getting your communities, especially creators in your communities, to document and reflect what's going on as this gigantic disruption is taking place in the world. I also thought that you could be doubling down on a very traditional set of missions that libraries have always fulfilled, which is curating trustworthy human vetted knowledge systems. I mean, the call to us all, and I think librarians will be in the forefront of this, is to figure out, where judicious application of human intelligence and very skeptical approaches to some of the outputs of AIs are going to be a really important role that you'll play in the future. And then serve as ethical stewards and AI watchdogs. I mean, certainly over the decades that I've been dealing with library folks, this is your secret sauce. The sensibilities that you've been trained in, the ways in which you approach the intersection of information and how it serves your communities or ill serves your communities. I think there are a variety of ways that you can add to the roster of things that you're doing on behalf of your communities. So that's what I've got, and I will stop showing my slides and turn it back to Don.
Terrifically. You covered a lot of ground there,
Yeah.
a lot of ground. I hope you didn't get squeezed too much because anyway, that's great. I've got a long list of questions already. I would like to open it up if anybody else has questions. I mean, I know you do, but if you'd like to share them, just step in. You don't have to raise your hand or anything. There's not that many of us. Just speak up. If not, I'll start on my list. So, Lee, the the metric on work was interesting, uh, and you also had for schools you had like 36%, something like that. But what would the work percentage be among that population? I suspect it's much higher, but do you have any measure on that, or is
It was stunning. Of course, those who are working are more likely to be using it for work. And so the percentages are, but it was stunning for me to find. It's one of the first numbers I looked for when we got the data back. Among workers, among people who have full-time jobs, they use AI for social and personal learning experiences at a greater level than they use it for work-related purposes. Now, I'm sure that there are, highly technical jobs. I mean, gosh, coders and other technical people, knowledge workers at the high end, like consultancies, like McKinsey and things. I'm sure it's the case that they are consumed with using AI for work. But in the broad, representative sample that we got here, it was clear that it's this social stuff, and in a way that harkens back to almost every technology, especially communications technology I've heard about. You know, the telephone was supposed to be for business purposes. That was the Bell and his successors said this is going to be great for business. And it turned out that even in the business community, some of the first stuff that was happening on the telephone was the social stuff. People would call each other up and just fill each other in and share the gossip and do all sorts of personal business. When the internet itself the ARPANET was created in the 1960s, it was meant to be a data sharing system between universities, high-end universities that were doing astrophysics and nuclear testing and weather forecasting and big systems data. These are monster files that it was going to be easier to transfer them around the country to get more eyeballs on them and stuff. What's the first thing they started doing? Is sending each other instant messages. They didn't even call it that at the time. They just typed these little things into their DDoS systems but it was social. It was all social. And so in a way, this isn't a surprise, although so much of the coverage and the national and the global narrative about AI has been about the business applications. And that's justified in its way because the first thing on people's minds when they worry about AI is what it's going to do to labor markets and what it's going to do to jobs. So both things are going on, but it was just so striking to me that in the variety of ways we've asked the question, and now other organizations like Pew have asked the question, the social stuff just cries out for notice because that's what's the dominant use.
right? Well, I think people are more inventive when they're highly motivated, and socially is how people really, really care about what's going on. It resonates with the early web that, as you say, grew out of a business application. If it was university to university file transfers or automating order entries and all that. It was people taking hold of it and playing with it that caused the explosion in the mid '90s. And that is the differentiator here. So this has been around, as you point out, for a while, but it wasn't until there was an end user version of it that, okay, this is an AI tool itself, not a tool within a tool that I check the weather every day or things that I'm aware of, but this is something I can use to play with and create stuff with. It was at that point ChatGPT took the roof off, and as you say, just a phenomenal uptake. Maybe we're getting something similar with the video application.
You
Another
know, the bandwidth is this now, thanks in large measure to libraries themselves. So that again, in the older era of digital life, text-based applications were the dominant ones because it just took a lot of bandwidth to share bigger files and video images and things like that. Right now, the coevolution of both text-based and video-based and audio-based material is marching pretty much in lockstep. I mean, it's a little, the more sophisticated files are a bit behind, but they're now um, systems to create videos that are world class, and they're going to get bigger. You can't use them for very much now, and the files aren't themselves allowed to be very big. But the dynamic here is going to be that it's going to get bigger sooner, and there's an arms race dynamic going on that side of things, just the way there's an arms race going on building the bigger, better model now too.
it's a great point that these large files are bandwidth dependent. And those of us living in, fairly well wired environments think that it's universal and pervasive, but it's not yet. It's still not evenly distributed. We have just never done it, in spite of the concept of universal service. When a service is deemed as a basic service, everyone should have affordable access to it. Telephones, electricity, and so forth. That infrastructure economics works against all the people that live farther away from the core of any network. They're they're more expensive to serve and they tend to have less money. And so when the ROI runs out, it stops. And when we asked this in the '90s about why we didn't have it, I mean, I live in a suburban rural community just north of San Francisco. It's fairly well to do, but we were not getting broadband in the mid '90s. We go, what's up? It's a new telecom. No, no. The carrier said, no, that's not us. We're just technology companies. We're like Intel and Cisco. We'll invest where we can expect a return. We'll get to you, but not now. We're in San Francisco and San Diego, et cetera. So that was a wake-up call that, you are, as a community, you're a market. You may not have thought of yourself that way, but you probably do by now. And so you have to be active. You have to develop a formal strategy to improve the value of your market or build it or buy it or something. But it's really important to do that. And it's still because it's not working, the federal government has shirked its responsibility to assure universal access. There are small towns, small town libraries that still lack decent broadband. And those communities are falling further behind. Not necessarily they're falling backward, it's just that this technology is moving, it's streaking ahead. And so that the people in the urban areas are benefiting from these innovations disproportionately compared to the people that are in more remote areas. And this has had this is one of our, our sore subjects, but this has had a political impact. If you just think about a small town with poor internet, no broadband, it means the kids are all leaving because there's no opportunities for them, and no companies are moving in. Who would do that? So these towns are shrinking, they're drying up, they're dying, and people are unhappy about that, as you'd imagine. desperate, if not fearful, and they're certainly angry. And I think we're seeing that play out across the political landscape. Part of our work is to at least assure that all the anchor institutions, starting with the libraries, because they serve everybody, are well wired. And it's a piece, but it can anchor a wider development. But we think it's much more important than just, yeah, we'll get the rest of the people, when we can get around to it. But we have poured, as a country, have poured tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars into balancing this out, and it just has not worked. The carriers are experts at taking these funds and really not spending them appropriately to actually level the playing field and close this so-called divide. Okay, off the stump here, but AI training is something you touched on as a library role, something that has kind of captured our thinking. Wouldn't it be great if the principles of librarianship were embedded in an AI model? If so, could not a model be trained on, let's just say, librarianship? There's all the principles and practices and history and everything involved in being a librarian as the basis for training how these models or how a model might behave. Have you considered that, or do you think that's feasible, or what?
Yes, considered it a lot, in part because it's so easy for people, relatively easy for people now to create their own language models. There is no central data collection source on this for a while. OpenAI was putting out data about its own system. People, there are buttons you can push on ChatGPT to make a custom a language model yourself, and they stopped publishing those data because so many were being created they couldn't keep track of them all. And they couldn't be counting on the fact that a click on that button meant that an actual system was being created. But there are lots of commercial and increasingly I hear about the aspiration, at least for nonprofit sensibilities being incorporated there. And you can these models are all about the weights that are baked into the system that generates the next word in the sentence that you're trying to construct. And so the sensibilities that librarians bring to sort of open discourse, to free resources, to honoring copyright, to caring about the provenance and declaring transparently the provenance of information. You can set the weights to do that. And it's not cheap, and there are kinks to be probably worked out on that. But soon enough, and we're only really not yet even 3 years into the ChatGPT age. Soon enough there will be grant making in and around this. There will be enterprise and communities that takes this as a mission. And so you can see librarians not only being built around sort of universal librarian values, but the values of specific communities or specific cultures or things like that. So, and the academy, and now I'm aware of this in ways I didn't used to be at Pew. There are a lot of professors at Elon who are building language models to serve the syllabus of a particular course they're teaching right now. So as they load the materials and background materials, and they're building Henry Ford language models. So just like there are Shakespeare language models, just like there are Abraham Lincoln language models, and you can write your queries into the model and get the answer that Henry Ford might have uttered on a business proposition back in the day, or even in current circumstances. It's ubiquitous, and it will. One of the crazy predictions we have gotten from some of the experts who look at the future is that soon enough it's going to first be a status symbol to have your own language model, and then soon enough it's going to be ubiquitous. I mean, there are people now who load all of their emails, for every email they've ever saved, into a language model, and it's basically a chronicle of their life, a chronicle of their thinking and their evolution. It's a really easy way to find things that they were thinking at a certain time period and things like that. So there are ways in which these models are very adaptable, and they'll become more efficient too. They're not going to, consume the same amount of electricity as the giant models are now consuming. So yes, a library model is absolutely in our future unless, this community really screws it up.
They won't. They won't.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think they ever have. They may have
yeah.
missed some opportunities, but they've never botched one, I don't think, to the extent that that might be. Uh, no, that's fascinating. One of the things that's attractive about that is how you measure the value of a model. You measure it on the basis of its accuracy and its responses and performance. Do you measure it on the basis of its reliability, on its trustworthiness, which trust has emerged as really almost topic A in the internet now. There's so much schlock that's being, thrown out there. Social media is just trashed. People just don't know where to go, so they just go to their friends. What do you think? I don't know. What do you think? And it's just kind of a circular process of people informing each other without really having sources beyond their own trusted network, with the notable exception of a few sources. One of those are libraries. And as trust declines everywhere, the trust in the library, by comparison, rises up as a kind of a mountain of distrust and misinformation all around. And it just seems logical that people will increasingly turn to libraries if the library has a vehicle to engage on this, in some way that's practical, that it would make a library train model, it would give it an automatic advantage. And there's a ton of information out there about what's involved in librarianship. I mean, all those principles and practices are all over the place. So it's not like you would have to build a new database for it. You just have to say, go get it. And I think something interesting could happen. Um,
Well, so one of the striking things that happened to libraries since the turn of the millennium was that they reinvented themselves to take account of all of the disruption caused by the internet in the first place. And among the metrics of indication of that were, of course, library schools became information schools. And you can
yes,
imagine now that inside information schools, high-end information schools in particular, they are fast at work on curricula to create essentially a degree in AI specialty or AI information science or something like that. And I can imagine in the not distant future, libraries themselves having a dedicated staff person or dedicated staff to specializing in applications of AI, literacy questions related to AI, helping people navigate through a world where, the other thing that's going to happen soon enough is we're going to be flooded with all of these AI agents acting on other people's behalfs. And agents are going to become, there's some people who think they're going to outgrow the human population by a lot. There will be hundreds of billions of agents and in service of the whatever it is 7.5 billion people that are now on Earth. So you're right; it's a very challenging environment, and it's just you're right, doubly as much that the call to librarians to be of service and to really be the vanguard of figuring this stuff out and figuring out how to help people navigate a much more confusing world is job one.
absolutely. Information science. I mean, what is AI if it's not information science
Yeah,
related?
yeah.
Yeah, it's a wild opportunity, and the thing that one of our recent speakers was pointing out is that librarians typically wait to be asked. You walk into a library, they don't ask you if they can help you; they just wait for you to come to them, right? They're reticent about putting themselves forward. They don't want to intrude on your self-direction, which is what presumably got you there in the first place. But in this case, our presenter was saying this is different. This is actually a responsibility of librarians to step forward and assert a role in the development, adoption, understanding of this new technology. So We agree with that. And so we're trying to poke everybody to, step forward, claim a seat at that table and try to educate people about libraries because people don't automatically investigate libraries. They just wait for librarians and librarians are waiting for them. So it's kind of a circular waiting
Well,
proposition.
it's just to remind folks on the call, in the era when trust has declined in on almost every measurable way in institutions, industry sectors, the church, certainly trust in government is at all-time lows. There are just a couple of places and a couple of sectors that have survived and even become more trusted in the onslaught. Librarians are on that list, as are nurses and firefighters. And the big institution that has survived the onslaught is the military. As you might remember, in the 1970s, the trust people had in the military was incredibly low at the end of the Vietnam War and heading into the sort of CIA scandals of the late 70s. How the military sort of reestablished itself as an amazing story and countercultural story almost. But librarians have always held up high, as have nurses and firefighters, and you're building on a base of trust if you are engaging with the wider world. People will listen.
That's true. 9/11, I would say, would mark the reversal on the military trust thing, the praise of our soldiers
It
born
was building
first.
before then. It was building back in the 90s, the Gulf War, and the decline of the Soviet Union, and the
Oh
freeing
yeah,
of
oh yeah,
Israel.
oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Smarter is an interesting notion that you touched on there. Uh, is a set of encyclopedias smarter than I am? Well, potentially, but it's not active. It doesn't have agency, I guess, is what's the difference there. And but what we think of as intelligence, I think, is a really fascinating um area of thought. And what is it exactly? That's one of the things AI has presented with us is a challenge to define it. And we define it in terms of human intelligence, but it has some of that, and usually is how we say, well, it really isn't because it can't do what we can do. But does that mean it's not intelligent? Well, we would say no, that does not mean that. It has intelligence. It's just alien. It's different as we think about that. That has pointed us back at natural intelligence found in the world at large and in nature and all the incredible problems that nature has solved that require immense complexity and intelligence. And so this is kind of an emergent notion about the nature of intelligence, where it's found, and I think this is a really helpful development contribution of AI. We are on the hour here, just about. Uh, I have more, but I think I'll have to leave it for another time. Like this impact on advertising, which is a profound effect economically, that the destruction of the advertising model that Google has relied on, not Google, but Google's sources of information, which are, people are just skipping that. It's a good enough answer. I just get it. I've got a good enough answer. I'm going to move on. Uh, is another fascinating element of it. But Lee, I'd like to let you leave us with final thoughts on this. Any kind of action lines that you would send us on, and of course, thank you for.
You've really invited me to lift my thoughts and aspirations to the higher level. In a way, a good way to think about AI is it's a mirror to us. It's telling us back to ourselves what we've sort of said to each other and written for each other and produced for each other. And it's like a giant language id for all of us. And one of the reasons probably it acts the way it does, it's because it's reflecting every dimension of human personality, including some of the really ugly stuff. But there are ways in which essential qualities of humanness are now sort of up for grabs or on the table to be thinking about. It used to be we could say, well, we'll let the mechanical thing do mechanical things and we'll let the human do this human thing. Sometimes that was called soft skills and hard skills. But I think the soft skills now, like empathy, like social and emotional intelligence, like curiosity, like creativity, that's all on the table now. And there are ways in which AI does a darn good job of mimicking some of those essential human traits and behaviors. And so I think the call to us, just like you said, is to study what all that means and to figure out the most foundational, important, essential stuff that really distinguishes us and to make sure that survives the onslaught and the IA can't be tampering with that or can't be supplanting it because we do have a lot to bring to the party.
That's great. Okay, well, that's going to be the final word today. We have to have you back to continue this conversation on a formal libraries and response session early next year. Uh, yes, the internet is essential. We're having Vince Cerf back for the third time in January, and we'll be
Bring
talking
my
about the
love.
same thing. So, thanks again. Great to
Okay,
see
John.
you, Lee, and uh, again soon.
Okay, thank you.